Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the GRAS token holder and network participant call on July 7th, 2026. This presentation is the property of GRAS. This presentation may not be copied, reproduced, published, distributed, streamed, displayed, transmitted, or otherwise exploited in whole or in part without prior written consent of GRAS. Unauthorized use of this presentation or its contents is strictly prohibited. To begin, I'd like to introduce Glenn Kennedy, a director of GRAS Foundation, to get started.
Thanks, Christina, and thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to the GRAS token holder and network participants call for the summer of 2026. My name is Glenn Kennedy. I'm one of the 3 directors serving on GRAS Foundation's board of directors. As to my background, prior to moving into the independent directorship space, I spent a majority of my career as a practicing lawyer and in legal roles. GRAS Foundation has a 3-person board. The other 2 members of the board are Craig Pascoe, who's also a professional director with a CPA background, and Aaron Unterman, who's a professional director with a legal background. Each of us is based in the Cayman Islands, and together the 3 of us and our firms have a significant amount of experience as directors in the Web3 space. As a member of the board of directors, my mandate is to ensure that the GRAS Foundation delivers on its responsibility for furthering the GRAS network and ecosystem through the actions of its subsidiaries. The GRAS Foundation acts as a steward to ensure that its subsidiaries engage in activities to accelerate the proliferation of the protocol, ecosystem, and token with the best interests of participants and token holders in mind. As such, in my capacity, along with the other 2 directors, I ensure that the contracts that GRAS Foundation or its subsidiaries enter into are reviewed, approved, and signed off against the combined knowledge of our many years of experience to ensure the GRAS Foundation upholds its mandate. Joining me today is Andrei Radonjic, who is the CEO and co-founder of WinLabs. WinLabs is the core engineering partner and commercial representative for GRAS. Win builds the software, it runs the business development efforts for GRAS, and supports the development and delivery of the custom data sets and data pipelines for AI labs, while all the underlying data delivery and contracts are executed directly by GRAS. On this call, Andre will be presenting on a few topics with the goal of providing a clear view on how the GRAS business has performed in 2025 and 2026, as well as where the business currently stands. With that, I'll hand over to Andre.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. It's been an incredibly interesting time for AI. We've watched companies make some of the largest infrastructure investments in the industry's history, and we've had the opportunity to work alongside many of them. Every few weeks, there seem to be new narratives about where the industry is going. One of the most exciting things about building data infrastructure is that we don't have to guess which of those narratives are right. We get a front row seat to where the market decides to allocate capital, and over the last year, these decisions have taught us a tremendous amount. They have influenced GRAS's business strategy, product development, and also its capital allocation. GRAS has grown a ton in the last year. Before I get into product developments and financials, I want to take a moment to discuss why GRAS exists in the first place. It's almost become a cliche to say that AI is only as good as the data it's trained on, but the statement is often repeated for good reason. Data remains the primary differentiator in frontier model performance. And despite all the progress we've seen in the last few years, acquiring useful data at internet scale remains one of the hardest engineering problems in AI. At its core, GRAS automates the acquisition and delivery of public web data at internet scale, and transforms it into structured data sets for frontier labs and AI-enabled enterprises. Millions of contributors make that possible through a globally distributed network, and GRAS's customers receive data that would otherwise not only require enormous engineering effort, but access to a residential network operating at a scale that is impractical for any individual organization to build themselves. There are a couple of things that make the web data problem particularly difficult. First, it's a problem of scale. The public web contains billions of pages spread across hundreds of millions of domains. Collecting meaningful coverage requires a globally distributed residential proxy network that is operating continuously. Second, the internet is fundamentally ephemeral. New knowledge is published every second. Old content disappears or gets changed. Building a high-quality data set isn't something you do once. it's a continuous process of discovering, acquiring, filtering, and refreshing information as the internet evolves. Finally, the web data problem is a problem of quality. Unlike compute, data is not fungible. Two different data sets of the same size don't contribute equally to model performance. The engineering challenge is not arbitrarily collecting more data. It's more about figuring out how to scale the collection of data that actually improves model performance. These are also the reasons GRAS has seen such strong repeat business. Building a frontier training corpus isn't a project that you finish. It's an evolving infrastructure that operates continuously. Nearly every AI lab we've worked with has come back for more data. Now, let me turn to financials. Over the last year, there's been no shortage of opinions about whether a token-enabled network could build a serious enterprise business. According to certain experts out there, that shouldn't even be possible. This opinion would probably come as a surprise to some of GRAS's customers. GRAS closed 2025 with $17 million in revenue, growing from $2.7 million in the first half of the year to $14.3 million in the second half. Through the first half of 2026, GRAS generated approximately $17 million in revenue, surpassing all of 2025's full year revenue in the first half of this year. This is nearly 7 times more than the first half of 2025. As the business has grown, two things have become increasingly clear. First, GRAS continues to broaden its customer base while seeing exceptionally strong repeat business. Today, that customer base includes some of the world's leading private AI companies, Fortune 100 enterprises, including members of the Mag 7, a number of the most exciting new AI labs being built today, and specialized model developers working on everything from video generation and text-to-speech to coding models. Second, we learned something important about how this market behaves. This business has meaningful seasonality. Frontier labs make their largest data purchase decisions around training cycles, and many of these cycles are contracted in the second half of the year. As a result, a disproportionate amount of commercial activity naturally falls into the second half of the year. This pattern has continued in 2026. While the first half of this year hit record numbers, GRAS originally expected another $15 million of additional business to begin the first half of 2026. Several customers have since shifted timing of their training programs to the third quarter. Reasons for this vary, ranging from waiting for GPU orders to be fulfilled to data ingestion issues. In these cases, there are clients that have infrastructure that is not scaled to the point of being able to receive data at the rate that GRAS is capable of sending it. Today, GRAS is working through approximately $35 million of late-stage commercial opportunities expected to begin in the second half of the year. Combined with business that is already under contract, GRAS anticipates a full-year revenue outlook of $65 to $75 million from training data alone. Beyond this year, we anticipate that inference data will fundamentally change the profile of the business as it moves towards a usage-based model and starts to capture the value of every query in every AI model. One question GRAS receives regularly is, why doesn't it disclose the names of AI labs it works with? The answer to this is pretty straightforward. Training datasets have become one of the most closely guarded forms of intellectual property in AI. GRAS's commitment to confidentiality is one of the reasons customers trust GRAS with one of the most strategically important assets in their organizations. Before I move on to strategy, I want to build on something Glenn mentioned earlier and explain the reasoning behind the entity structure. Wynn Labs is essentially an engineering organization. We build software and support operations on behalf of the GRAS network. Wynn Labs does not own the intellectual property behind GRAS. Any intellectual property that we create at Wynn Labs is owned by GRAS. Wynn Labs does not own customer contracts. We will support GRAS with respect to customer acquisition and support, but we do not have the ability to enter into contracts on behalf of GRAS. All revenue generated pursuant to customer contracts flows directly to the GRAS Foundation. Wynn Labs does not own the commercial relationships that support the operation and growth of the network or that make it valuable. The most accurate way to characterize Wynn Labs is as a service provider to GRAS. GRAS's commercial success does not result in the accrual of any value in Wynn Labs. It was designed this way intentionally. In traditional startups, value can sometimes migrate away from the original ownership vehicle through acquisitions, talent deals, licensing arrangements, or other structures. This is not the model we wanted for Grass. The enduring value of Grass is meant to sit with the network. Customer contracts are executed through Grass, and revenue flows directly to Grass, nowhere else. Since the token launched, every dollar that has been raised was raised directly through the token ecosystem with no equity components. Grass has not raised and does not intend to raise money via equity. This is a very important point because it underlines Grass's commitment to a token-centric ecosystem that is being built for the network and its participants. One thing that we've become increasingly disciplined about over the last year is capital allocation. Grass purchased a significant amount of compute and storage in 2025 before cloud pricing increased materially across the industry. Through 2025, Grass made a deliberate decision to invest aggressively into its infrastructure. At the time, it may not have been obvious to some that these investments would pay for themselves as quickly as they did. The investments in infrastructure have reduced Grass's operating expenses by over $1 million a month. Without these investments, Grass would not be profitable today. Grass's ongoing cash expenses are now approximately $2 to $3 million per month, implying a 20% net margin in H1. The majority of the cash expenses are infrastructure related, so compute, storage, and bandwidth, not headcount, which represents around 20% of 2026 spend in H1 2026. Grass's objective is to ensure that token holders and network participants are maximally aligned with the long-term success of the network. As regulatory frameworks, including legislation like the Digital Assets Clarity Act including legislation like the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act in the United States, continue to evolve, Grass will continue to evaluate the best ways to strengthen its alignment in a way that's both durable and compliant. We all care a lot about getting this right. In the meantime, though, no equity, just Grass. I'd like to spend some time now going over business strategy. One thing we've learned from closely working with Frontier AI Labs is that the demand for training data is showing no signs of slowing down. Coming into 2026, it became clear that the highest return investment was to continue to strengthen Grass's position in training data. We've spent years building the infrastructure that continuously discovers, acquires, and filters web data at internet scale. Continuing to improve these systems alongside customers has made Grass's products better and its infrastructure more efficient. It's important to note that this does not mean that inference data has become less important to the business. It's actually quite the opposite. One of the things we're most excited about is the Grass infrastructure that we've built and the fact that it naturally extends to inference data. The systems we've built continuously map and structure public web data and will eventually become the foundation for real-time systems. Some of you may have heard me talking about live context retrieval in the past. That's exactly what this is. Later this summer, Grass will begin publicly launching the first products under the LCR umbrella, making the same Grass infrastructure we've spent years building available for AI models in real time, not just for the training process. In fact, this infrastructure is already being used internally in order to collect frontier-scale training data, and it is an impactful technological tool for the network and for Grass's customers. For inference data, there are three things that matter: speed, cost, and accuracy. Because Grass owns the infrastructure end-to-end, from residential network to compute to storage, we believe Grass is exceptionally positioned to compete across all three of these. Before I wrap up, I want to spend some time talking about the network itself, as well as participant rewards. None of what we discussed today would be possible without the millions of people who choose to contribute some of their unused bandwidth to the network. Today, the network consists of several million active participants. The network's more reliable than it's ever been. Success rates and core performance metrics are up across the board, and that comes directly from improvements to Grass's detection and filtering. It turns out preventing bad actors from gaining the system is exactly what leads to stronger and more sustainable network performance. Grass's goal has always been pretty simple: reward the real users who support the network with bandwidth, the network that with bandwidth that the network can actually use. So in short, real rewards are going to real users. If you're interested in learning more about how rewards were calculated and which metrics are more important to the network, keep an eye out for an explainer that'll come from official GRAS channels. And I'm going to quickly wrap up now with a couple of other network updates. First, the Grasshopper, the dedicated plug-and-play consumer device for network contributors. I'm sorry. I'm reading a script right now, and this part of it got a little bit butchered, so I'm going to restart that part. First, the Grasshopper, a dedicated plug-and-play consumer device for network contributors, has been developed. At this time, the decision has been made to pause the rollout of this device, and the network prioritizes other initiatives that are of higher value to the business's immediate needs. Due to a number of network optimization initiatives over the last year, GRAS is already capable of much of the functionality that the planned hardware device was designed to add. Revenue per node can be scaled further, and deploying hardware devices right now would not materially improve the network in the manner required to justify its capital expenditure. Also, GRAS will be releasing an in-app non-custodial wallet alongside Stage 2 rewards. This makes it easier for any GRAS user to claim rewards, including those who are having difficulty adding and swapping wallets in the past. Keep an eye out for initial announcements on this topic.
Now we will begin the Q&A portion of the call. Glenn, the first question is for you. Why does GRAS pay out Stage 2 rewards in USDC rather than native tokens, and how does that affect the value capture of the token?
Thanks, Christina. The use of USDC as a rewards mechanism is reflective of GRAS's ability to become self-sustaining over the past year and a half. The network has become fully operational since the first airdrop, and GRAS can now reward contributors in ways that make sense for both the long-term health and success of the ecosystem. For as long as it's economically viable, contributors should be rewarded from the value the network creates and not from inflation. It's also important to note that GRAS is operating in one of the most rapidly developing fields with a lot of regulatory uncertainty, especially regarding the manner in which token-centric businesses operate. GRAS's fundamental commitment to the contributors GRAS's fundamental commitment to the contributors to its network is to provide them with rewards for their contribution in a fair and equitable manner that supports the continued development and proliferation of the GRAS ecosystem. In light of the ongoing regulatory uncertainty in certain jurisdictions where GRAS has a meaningful user base, as well as GRAS's desire to reward contributors in all eligible jurisdictions in a timely and fair manner, GRAS has chosen to issue rewards using USDC in an attempt to achieve these objectives. GRAS will continue to work with local regulators to find the best pathways to operate the network in compliance with all applicable laws. And on the second part of the question, which is about value capture, the objective is still the same. Token holders should be aligned with the long-term success of the network. As I mentioned earlier, we're in a period where reinvesting capital into the business generates the highest long-term reward for the ecosystem. At the same time, GRAS is closely following the relevant regulatory frameworks because they will help shape the most durable ways of strengthening that alignment over time. Moving to USDC rewards does not reduce the role of the token. We understand that a number of network contributors would have preferred GRAS token rewards. In these cases, they are free to swap USDC to GRAS tokens on secondary markets, as holders of USDC are free to swap their USDC for the other digital assets. The GRAS in-app wallet will have swap functionality, and this can be done, and this can even be done there via Jupiter.
Thank you, Glenn. Andre, the next few questions will be for you. Since data deliveries are executed as one-time asset allocations rather than multi-year agreements, how should we evaluate customer churn and revenue predictability?
Okay. So I actually think that the premise of this question is slightly misleading. So many of GRAS's engagements do actually begin as individual purchases that are tied to usually a specific training run. But training data, like I mentioned earlier, is not really a one-time product. So Frontier Labs are training continuously. Once a lab figures out what improves its model performance, it typically just wants more and more of that data. And in many of those cases, we've yet to see a ceiling on that demand. So this has been playing out over and over again for GRAS. And a significant portion of GRAS's revenue this year is actually coming from returning customers. As for why these aren't structured as multi-year contracts, that's really a reflection of how AI labs operate. Most labs don't plan several training runs into the future because the output of one model is going to heavily influence the one that comes next, or whether another model comes next. What matters more is whether customers continue coming back, and so far, that's what's happening.
Thank you. Why do frontier AI labs with massive internal engineering teams still choose to utilize the GRAS network for data ingestion?
So the short answer to this is that it isn't a problem that you just solve by throwing more engineers at it. Collecting public web data at internet scale these days requires like a continuous acquisition pipelines as well as a globally distributed proxy network. Could an AI lab build those things internally? Theoretically, yes. Some AI labs have built individual parts of the stack, and they are complementary to GRAS. But in practice, even if a company spends years of engineering effort on data pipelines, it would still require access to millions of residential connections in order to access the right kind of web data at real internet scale. Apart from infrastructure, though, even the largest labs still need to allocate their resources efficiently. So an engineer building data pipelines is an engineer that isn't improving model architecture or post-training techniques. That's where most of the labs want their top engineers to be focusing. So the goal is to really just let customers focus on what they do best, while GRAS continues to focus on what GRAS does best.
One more for you, Andre, before we head back to Glenn. What is the strategic rationale for not entering the inference data market sooner? And how does your training data infrastructure relate to the upcoming live contracts retrieval engine?
So this really comes down to capital allocation. Over the last year, every signal that we've received from customers has pointed to the fact that high quality training data continues to be one of the highest value problems to work on in AI. The demand from AI labs to build better frontier models is not showing any kind of sign like that it's slowing down. And in many cases, the limiting factor is having enough of the right kind of data. One of the big reasons that a number of large AI enterprises have recently begun selling their excess compute, I'm not sure. This has been like all over headlines recently. Like all these AI enterprises are starting to roll out AI cloud services. This boils down to the fact that their training pipelines are all data constrained. Like when you have all the GPU toys in the world available to you, all of a sudden AI suddenly becomes massively bottlenecked by data. So at the same time, though, we are working a lot on data and for training data. And at the same time, everything that's been built for training naturally extends to inference. So this is something that I've mentioned on a few occasions now. Like you think of it in terms of layers. The infrastructure that you need to crawl and understand data at web scale also happens to be the same infrastructure that's required to serve real-time information to AI models. So LCR is not a pivot. It's not a completely unrelated roadmap item. What you should think of it as is the next logical layer that's built on top of the infrastructure that's already been in development for years.
Thank you. And Glenn, we have time for one final question. Who did the network focus on hiring during the first half of the year? And how did those positions map to your top strategic priorities over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Good question. The majority of our hiring in the first half of the year was in engineering. As the business has grown, GRAS has also hired an operations manager to help manage the rapidly increasing number of commercial contracts and enterprise relationships. Looking ahead, engineering hires remain the priority. The hires are going to be focused in two areas. The first is continuing to build better training data architecture, and the second is building the layer on top of that, which is LCR.
Thank you both so much. Those are all the questions we have for today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.